Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and this is State of Mind. We're here in front of McMaster University Student Center here at scenic McMaster University, where we have the privilege and honor to speak with the Associate VP of Students and Learning and the Dean of Students, Sean Van Koughnett. Join us as he shares with us his state of mind on the state of the university student. Sean, thanks so much for joining us on State of Mind. So let's level set for our audience, both here in Canada and in the United States. You serve as the Dean of Students here at McMaster University. Define the role and how does that differ from a typical Vice President of Student Affairs?
Well, Dean of Students really oversees much of the student life, student experience with a focus outside the classroom. It's really very similar to in the United States where you'd have a Vice President of Students. I'm the lead senior administrator when it comes to student affairs. So some of the areas that fall in my portfolio are things like athletics and recreation, student wellness, student accessibility, the registrar's office, our student success center, things of that nature. So it's really very much like a Vice President of Student Affairs in the United States.
Now, we're obviously here in a very unique time of the school year. Brand new, first full week of classes. Students are coming onto campus, so you probably have your hands full. It's been a long time since I was a college student, university student here in Canada, and I'm sure for yourself as well. Help our audience level set. Give me a state of the university student, if you could.
Well, today's student, I mean, there are some similarities from the past, but there's obviously a lot of things that have changed. The financial pressures, social pressures, the career-oriented nature of the university experience now, where many students are coming in with at least feeling the pressure to determine what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. These are all things that have changed, or at least become more, there's been more of an emphasis over the last couple decades on those things.
Now, how does social media and technology play into this? Because it was just starting to happen when I was graduating from university, but it's full-blown now, and I have to imagine you can't escape it.
There's, as with any kind of technology, there are benefits to having that technology in your life. There's also drawbacks. As a student, everything is a little bit more immediate. You're more well connected, in theory at least, online to your peers and to student services. The drawback is there's a lot of information out there. How do you sift through all of it? It can be a distraction from what you should really be focused on. There are additional complexities in student relations now where there are some negative behaviors that occur online that we end up dealing with. So I'd say it's neither good nor bad. It's just there are additional complexities that any new technology brings into a student's life.
So going back to the topic that you had mentioned earlier when you were giving your state of the student, with regards to the Canadian student, what are the issues, if you had to prioritize them, that matter most to them in this day and age?
I think career development, career exploration is top of mind for students. They want to have a sense coming into the university what they're going to get at the end of the 4 or 5 years that they're here. That's of primary importance to them. It's of primary importance to their parents as well. They're investing a lot into their education and they want to see some tangible outcome at the end of it, what they're going to get. That can be problematic in some of the disciplines where it's not certain what kind of career you're going to end up with. So especially in the arts-related disciplines, in humanities and social sciences, it's a little less certain what type of career you're going to engage in after you obtain your degree. And that's resulted in part, I think, a decline in the interest in those disciplines across the continent. Another thing that all students think about is the cost of education. It's not something that's decreasing. Obviously, there are different government aid programs that come into play. In this province, they're making an effort to make it more transparent from the point at which students will receive an offer, how much they'll actually be paying once they've factored in all the financial aid. So obviously cost is a factor for both students and their parents. And the third thing, and I've talked to a lot of students, and one of the reasons that many of them come to MAC is the sense of community they feel here, even though we're a relatively large institution with over around 25,000 students. They want to feel like there's a place here where they're going to fit and where they're going to belong. So I would say that's a little less tangible, but it's as important as the career prospects, as the cost of attending. I'd say community is a third element that's very important to students.
So as we head into 2020 and we finish up this decade, in your role, talk to me about the issues that we don't foresee yet, the things that you're already thinking about that potentially keep you up at night.
Well, there hasn't been any decrease in the demand for some services related to health, mental health, and so how we're continually able to provide the support that's needed from that students who need that type of support. That's something that keeps me awake at night, as well as students with different types of disabilities. The number of students who are registered in our accessibility office continues to increase dramatically. And so that's in part related to mental health, the increase in the need for mental health support. But that's another area where students often need custom, kind of personalized types of accommodations related to their disability, and that's labor and time intensive. And so how we're able to meet that demand is another area that continues to increase.
So on the topic of mental wellness and mental health, I think in the last 15 to 20 years we've seen an increased awareness of it. I think people are more comfortable talking about it. One, how does McMaster do in terms of putting the procedures and policies in place to enable students to have that accessibility? And then two, how does McMaster fare against its Canadian counterparts?
Yeah, I think we're challenged, as are many of our counterparts. I think over the last 2 years, we've put in a strategy to try to address some of the challenges. So we're revising our policy on academic accommodations, which had not really factored in mental health disabilities as part of that policy. We have made an effort and trained over 100 of our frontline staff on they're now better able to recognize signs and symptoms of students who are experiencing mental health difficulties, so they're able to refer those students to our support services. One of our challenges is still to build capacity within our Student Wellness Center to meet the demand. And the flip side of that is trying to establish what we should be and what we shouldn't be trying to provide in our Student Wellness Center. We're not going to be a full-fledged hospital. There's not the funding to do that, and there are services in the community that can do that. So trying to establish what we should be providing to students and when we should be referring out is a key question, because then it then drives what we should be trying to fund.
You had mentioned earlier about students with disabilities. I want to take that conversation to an even more holistic level about diversity. Diversity in background, diversity in race, diversity in the student itself. When I spoke with Patrick Dean, the president of McMaster, we talked about Southern Ontario being a hotbed of all these different cultures and backgrounds and perspectives. And my question to him was more about the faculty, staff, and administration. From a student standpoint, talk to me about how important it is to have a university of diverse students with different backgrounds, not just for the students themselves, but for the university as a whole.
Yeah, I think the students, everyone who joins this university, and the students in particular, shape it in their time here. And so if we're going to shape ourselves in a way that has a global outlook and strives to meet the needs of society, we have to be a reflection of that society. And so the diversity we attract here is incredibly important. Most of our undergraduate students do come from within an hour or so drive, even though we're kind of known somewhat globally. The undergraduate population is primarily local. That's not to say it isn't diverse, though. We have virtually every ethnicity, religion, background you can imagine here, as well as a couple thousand international students, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So it's incredibly important, though, for the growth of this.
Now, a question that's been very relevant in the world today is a lot of what's been happening in the news from a race and from a political standpoint. How does that translate here to the academic level? I think sometimes there's an assumption that the academic arena is a little bit siloed away from the real world, but if anything, it's a gateway to the next step in one's career, one's transition. How do you transition from what's happening in the real world into your role to convey that to students, to get them to open up their minds and understand what's going on around them?
Yeah, I think it's our constant challenge to try to understand what's going on in the world and not only begin to discuss those issues, but how do we get ahead of those issues? We're not only a mirror of society here. When we reflect back, we should actually be attempting to address important issues in a way that the world has not yet addressed them. So universities really need to be leaders when it comes to looking at global issues, and that's a constant challenge. How do you actually stay ahead of the thinking that goes on outside campus?
So, in a perfect world, and you've been in the role for a couple of years now, if you had a wish list and you could go to President Dean and say, I'd like to be able to do X, Y, and Z, prioritize for me what you think is where the money, the funding should go to.
Well, it's a tough question. I mean, there is additional need for this, the things that, and I'm biased, of course, in my role, but the things that go on outside the classroom are as important to me and to the student experience as what goes on inside the classroom. That can mean both support services, but also how we fund and mobilize ourselves to provide curricular experiences outside the classroom. So experiential learning that students get credit for is a piece that is a priority of ours. So how we fund that, that's a different way of thinking from obviously the traditional lecture in a lecture hall teaching. So there's a whole infrastructure there if we want to do that on a large scale. Large scale co-op programs and that type of thing require investment. I think that's what students are looking for, and so that would be one area. The area of health and mental health, of course, as we've addressed, is one that I think as a system we need to fund better. We need to figure out a better way to fund support there. So those are a couple of things that I'd be putting my hand out for.
There you go. Well, we have it on camera, so we can definitely make the request. Final couple of questions before we wrap up. With the brand new school year upon us, what message would you give to incoming students and current students in terms of getting through the next year or 2 or 10?
Well, back to health. If you don't have a strong, and I call it the foundation for your success is your health. Your physical health, your mental health, whether it's us in our careers or a student here, you have to have that base in order to be successful. So how you take care of yourself, it sounds very basic, but it's something that can easily get lost as you're focused on that next assignment, that next test. So how you work physical activity in each day, how you work your healthy relationships in each day, that's an important part of enabling you to be successful academically. The other thing, and I've got university-age kids myself, so I will sound like a parent when I say this, but I try to get them to relax a bit. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety about what am I going to do, when I graduate, what am I going to do for my career, for my job, and not that you don't think about those things, but I try to convey that you should have some faith in the process, that if you're working hard, you're constantly trying to learn, you're figuring out what your strengths are, you're building on those strengths, good things will happen. So just trying to take the level of the pressure down a bit and try to convey a sense that everything's going to be fine. You got to put the effort in and you got to think and plan ahead, but try to enjoy yourself too.
So you mentioned being a parent. I myself am a parent, although my children are much smaller and have many years before college and university. What advice would you give to the parents as their students enter the university? And
similar advice maybe is, and it's easy for me to say, I guess, but relax a bit. I think there's a lot of anxiety out there about different things, but this should be a moment where you can enjoy. It might not be enjoyable every day. That's not realistic. There is stress involved. And that's part of the learning process, is to struggle through that stress and learn from it. But for parents, it's more trying to take a step back and get perspective on things, and to learn about the university that your son or daughter is at, so that if they call with a problem, you're not left thinking that you need to find the solution for it, but that you can advise them and say, well, did you check out your academic advising office or the student wellness center, etc. So if they can equip themselves to a little bit about the university, they'll be better equipped to help their son or daughter.
So, well, Sean, thanks so much for joining us today. Gave some great insights, and appreciate your state of mind.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. That'll wrap up our show for today. If you like what you saw in today's episode, please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe on the various social media platforms at the bottom of your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.